Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Queensland Media Club, where we're about to hear Senator Murray Watt deliver his address, Queensland, the Federal Elections Key Battleground. I'm Sarah Elks. I work for the Australian newspaper, so forgive me for being a newspaper reporter in a job normally reserved for TV journalists. Murray Watt was elected to the federal parliament in 2016, and since Anthony Albanese and Labor won in 2022, he's had a succession of thorny ministerial portfolios. He started as Agriculture and Emergency Management Minister at a time when the Hunter Valley was underwater. Foot and mouth disease in Indonesia threatened our livestock industry, and the varroa mite was killing our bees. Senator Watt's been the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations since July, and in August, the federal government forced the CFMEU into administration, which, of course, the militant construction union accepted calmly and quietly. Before entering federal parliament, Senator Watt was a Queensland MP, a workplace lawyer, and was Anna Bligh's Chief of Staff. He was once described by former ALP State Secretary Evan Moorhead as the second best politician in his marriage, and a big hello to Senator Watt's wife, Cynthia, who's in the audience today. He's also a Liverpool tragic and once dislocated his knee during a Parliamentary Friends of Soccer game, and he's a third-generation unionist, hoping to make it 4 generations when his son enters the workforce next year. If Watt Jr. takes a job in the construction industry, that might make for some interesting chats around the dinner table. Please join me in welcoming Senator Murray Watt to the stage.
Well, thanks very much, Sarah. I think it's one thing to give a stock standard biography for a function you're addressing, but when a journalist is doing the introductions, they're capable of doing their own research. So well done, Sarah. Even the old, it was actually a broken knee, not a dislocated knee, which sounds a much better story, I reckon. Thanks everyone for coming along today. I, of course, acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we've gathered on today, the Yagara and Turrbal people, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Can I acknowledge again my parliamentary colleagues, federal and state, Shane Newman, Di Farmer and Jonty Bush. Terrific to have all of you here. To all of the many business, union and community leaders who've joined us here today, thank you very much for coming along to talk about our great state. And I'd also, of course, like to thank Paul Lata, Sarah and all at the Queensland Media Club, including all of your commercial partners, for providing a really important forum for us all to get together and think about and talk about the future of our state and our nation. So I'm really delighted to speak with you today at what is my first address to the Queensland Media Club. I've done the National Press Club in Canberra, but now we're doing the one that really matters here in Brisbane. And I am particularly pleased to be here at the Queensland Media Club as a very proud Queenslander. Although I think if we're being honest, is there any other kind of Queenslander other than a very proud one? And we do have a lot to be proud about as a state. Our landscapes and our natural environment, which really supply that incredible lifestyle we're known worldwide for. Our business, our educational, research, community, social, sporting, cultural achievements that again are known really well around the world and contribute so much to our nation. Our social reform, often not recognised by our southern state colleagues, but amongst other things delivering the end of the death penalty, was done in Australia well before many other states, and we were the state that supplied Australia's first majority female cabinet. But most of all, apart from all of those achievements of our state, the thing I'm most proud of is our people, Queenslanders. With our give-it-a-go attitude, our casual questioning of authority figures, and our unyielding willingness to help a mate who's in strife. And probably like many of you, I've seen that great Queensland spirit on display over and over again, wherever I've been in our great state, in really good times and in really hard times, like those natural disasters that hit our state so often. Queenslanders, I think you'd agree, are go-ahead people. And as we emerge from some really tough global circumstances, I think we need governments that take our state forward, not back. And that's what I intend to talk to you about today, is what our government is doing to take Queensland forward, to deal with the challenges we've got now and map out an even better future for our state, and to talk to you about what is at stake at the next federal election. Because again, I'm sure you'd all agree that there's a hell of a lot going on in Queensland right now. Now, for as long as I've been involved in Queensland politics, which is going on 20 years or so, population growth has been a constant and it continues today. That growth, of course, brings wealth and economic activity to our state, but it also does put pressure on our superb lifestyle. Of course, that's not the only pressure that our state and its people are facing right now. Our decentralised population presents challenges to deliver the kind of services that people need. Our changing climate is bringing more intense natural disasters, and with that, some of our traditional industries are transitioning to new ones, especially in our regions. Meanwhile, in only 8 years, we will host the Olympics, which will put us on the centre of the world stage. But I think, again, you'd probably agree that the biggest challenge facing Queenslanders right now is the same as the one that all Australians are facing, which is real cost of living pressures. There's no doubt that the last few years have been really tough for Queenslanders, just as they have been for all Australians. A rare combination of global events, a once-in-100-year pandemic, a worldwide inflation surge, and overseas conflicts, those things have all really hit home even here. And that has made life harder for Queenslanders right across our state. Of course, being Queenslanders, we've shown grit and determination to get through. And I pay tribute to all in our state who've shown the resilience that us Queenslanders are so well known for. But it has been tough, and it still is, for many of the people that we love and care about. So it's no surprise that as I travel around Queensland, as I frequently do, what I hear people say is that they want a government in Canberra that has got their back, that joins them in the fight against inflation and against cost of living pressures, that ensures they have secure jobs and better pay so they can deal with those pressures, that builds the homes they need and provides affordable and accessible healthcare no matter where they live in our state, that invests in the energy transition and the industries that are critical to our economic future, that ensures that our state gets its fair share of the wealth that we produce for our nation. And I can tell you that each of those aspirations that I hear all across Queensland are exactly the same aspirations that drive the Albanese Labor government. And that's no surprise, given we're led by a rugby league mad Prime Minister who has delivered infrastructure projects in every corner of our state. A treasurer from Logan who wants to build opportunity in communities like the one he grew up in and now represents. And a small but effective Queensland Labor team, including my good friend Shane Newman, that goes into bat for our state every single day. And what that collective effort means is that, while of course we govern for the whole nation, our government's priorities are Queenslanders' priorities. Everything our team does in Canberra is designed to meet those aspirations that I hear when I get around Queensland, and you no doubt hear from your fellow Queenslanders as well. And none are more pressing than tackling those very real cost of living pressures that Queenslanders are experiencing. As I've said, there's no getting around the fact that the last few years have been tough. We came to office a couple of years ago facing serious global challenges that were impacting Queenslanders at their kitchen tables. Inflation above 6% and rising, energy prices skyrocketing, broken supply chains driving building costs through the roof. And that, of course, was all made worse by our predecessors running up eye-watering deficits, trashing international trade relationships that our business people depend upon, and deliberately keeping wages low. But just as our government has faced up to these challenges, so have Queenslanders. And while there are still challenges to solve, then there are still people under pressure who need our help. When we look at the economy today, we can see new reasons for optimism and new proof that the worst is behind us. Our government's responsible economic management has more than halved inflation from what we inherited and it's still falling. We've turned LNP deficits into Labor surpluses, 2 in a row, something the Reserve Bank Governor has acknowledged has helped bring inflation down. At the same time, we've delivered crucial cost of living relief to all Queenslanders. We made the hard decision to change the LNP's tax cuts so they didn't just benefit higher income earners, particularly people in Sydney and Melbourne. So Queenslanders were the big winners from that, with nearly 9 out of 10 of our state's residents being better off under Labor's changes to the tax cuts. We've also delivered energy bill relief, more rent assistance, cheaper medicines, cheaper childcare, free TAFE, reduced student debt, lifted bulk billing, and we're taking action on unfair charges made by supermarkets, banks and more. Now, I don't pretend that all of this support has made life perfect for Queenslanders. It's still really tough out there. But there's no question that we have stood shoulder to shoulder with Queenslanders and all Australians through these tough times. Of course, this job isn't yet done, so our government will keep using every responsible tool at our disposal to push inflation down and support those in our community who need a leg up in the months ahead. And while we've worked hard to push prices down, we've also made big changes to push wages up. Because having a job and being paid more is vital to Queenslanders staying afloat during challenging times. After a decade of LNP economic policy at the federal level, with low wages as a, quote, deliberate design feature, we went to the election promising to get wages moving again. Too many Queenslanders and too many Australians were falling behind because wages were kept deliberately low. And since we're elected, creating more jobs and lifting wages has been a key focus for our government and for me personally in my new portfolio. While this work will continue, it's terrific to see it starting to bear fruit. We'll see new wage data released tomorrow, but Queensland is already performing above the national average for wage growth, 4.6% over the last 12 months, ahead of inflation. The average full-time Queensland worker is now earning $195 extra per week since we were elected. Minimum wage earners, the lowest paid in our community, are earning $24.10 per hour compared to $20.33 per hour when our government took office. And we've supported pay rises for aged care and early childhood workers who do such important work caring for our loved ones but have been grossly undervalued in the past. And this is a key reason why the gender pay gap has fallen to the lowest level on record. I acknowledge there are many business representatives in the room, and I acknowledge that extra wages do mean extra costs for your business. But we need to remember that because of Labor's wages policy and tax cuts, that has enabled Queenslanders to earn more and keep more of what they earn and give them more opportunities to spend that money in businesses like yours. Vital higher income is now being delivered to help Queenslanders deal with those cost of living pressures. That's good for families and it's also good for local economies. There are also more Queenslanders in work. Across Australia, we've overseen the creation of over 1 million new jobs in a single parliamentary term, which no government in Australia's history has ever achieved before. Importantly, around half of those new jobs have been for women, whose participation in the workforce continues to grow. In Queensland, an extra 200,600 new jobs have been created since we were elected, and around 110,000 of those are full-time jobs in both the southeast and our regions. Now, creating this many jobs is a remarkable achievement in the context of a slowing economy and a labour market that is expected to soften. And I pay tribute to all of the employers in the room and their workers for working with us to get that done. Now again, I recognise that times are still tough for many people, but imagine how much worse they would be if Queenslanders and Australians had lost their jobs or if they didn't get those pay rises. And as I'll explain a little bit later, we can't take that for granted at the next election. I mentioned earlier that, like all Australians, Queenslanders are desperate for new homes in the southeast and our regions. The housing supply shortage in Australia is a problem that has been decades in the making. We inherited a housing system that was broken by a decade of Liberal neglect and savage cuts to public housing. And since we were elected, our government has taken action to turn that around. We're doing that in particular by boosting supply to make housing more affordable. Right now, our government is delivering significant housing funding that will build thousands of homes right across our state. This includes spearheading the largest investment in social and affordable housing our country has seen for more than a decade. In fact, over the past 2 months, we've announced 3 big projects that will build nearly 1,500 homes in places like Cairns, Toowoomba, Southport, Woolloongabba, Meadowbrook, Chermside and Redcliffe. Now, these homes will be more than just 4 walls in a roof. They're about reducing housing stress for renters, first home buyers and our most vulnerable Queenslanders. We're doing more than that though. We are also helping more regional Queenslanders into their first home with the Regional First Home Buyers Guarantee. And we're providing renters with support, delivering the largest increase to rent assistance in decades. Now, there is more to do, and you may have noticed that we haven't had a whole lot of help from our political opponents to deliver the homes that Queenslanders need. Right now, the LNP and the Greens are working together to block our Help to Buy scheme, which will help renters buy their own homes. Just like they worked together to delay our $10 billion new housing fund, which would have actually had houses available right now for people to live in. But while the LNP and the Greens work together to block housing, Labor will keep building, because that's what Queenslanders want. In a state as decentralised as Queensland, ensuring our people have affordable and accessible healthcare has always been a Labor priority. It's a fundamental right of all Queenslanders to get good quality, affordable healthcare no matter where they live. But that has been getting harder. And again, when we came to office, we inherited a Medicare system that was on the brink, with LNP cuts sending bulk billing into freefall. I'm pleased to say, and you may have seen in the Courier Mail and on the ABC this morning, that is turning around. Labor's record investments in Medicare this term are turning that bulk billing fall around into positive territory. A year ago, we tripled the bulk billing incentive for pensioners, concession card holders and children under 16 as part of a $6 billion investment in Medicare, the largest ever done by a federal government. And new figures show this investment has created an additional 1.1 million bulk billed GP visits for Queenslanders in just 1 year. So after years of decline, Queensland's bulk billing rate has now increased by 2%, meaning that over 75% of all GP visits across the state last month were bulk billed, with 9 out of 10 Queensland kids now being bulk billed. Now, I know it can be still a bit hard at times to find a bulk billed appointment, but those figures show that we are on the right path, and it's a direct result of the investments the Albanese Labor government has made. Doctors are saying that our changes have given them the confidence to bulk bill more patients more often. And, given consultations are free, it's delivering real cost of living relief when Queenslanders need it the most. Our investments in bulk billing build on the other ways we're strengthening Medicare and making healthcare more accessible and affordable for Queenslanders, like our 12 Medicare urgent care clinics across Queensland, including one about 2 kilometres from here at Annerley, providing bulk billed, walk-in care, early to late, 7 days a week, taking pressure off busy hospital emergency departments. And of course, we're also supporting more than 1,500 new GPs to train in Queensland, and we're increasing Medicare rebates across the board. We know there's more to do, but these measures are starting to make a real difference, and they're putting money back in Queenslanders' pockets. Labor created Medicare, and we're committed to strengthening it, which is vital for our sprawling, decentralised state. Some of you might have been here a few months ago in this very venue when the Prime Minister stood before you and announced our government's plan for a future made in Australia. And it wasn't an accident that he chose Queensland to announce this policy. Because not only is it clear that Queensland has done great work in preparing for the future and the jobs that it will create, but also, of course, because Queensland is the hotbed for those who like to sow a bit of division about the energy transition. Whether that was Bob Brown and the Greens convoy that travelled into central Queensland to look down their noses at our colleagues, or David Littleproud and the Nationals pretending the climate and the world aren't changing. There's something about Queensland that makes it the epicentre of the climate culture war. Now, it is a fact that Queenslanders want cheap power that continues to create local jobs and prosperity for the next generation. And it's a fact that the best way to do that is through a transition to cheaper, cleaner energy, powered by renewables and backed up with gas and storage. And that's exactly what our government's Future Made in Australia plan is all about. Harnessing our incredible clean energy resources and using the cheap power they produce to create the value-adding jobs our country and our state needs. And no state in Australia is better placed to take advantage of this future than Queensland. The two sectors with the most potential to grow, green hydrogen and critical minerals processing, require cheap green electricity and raw critical mineral ores, and Queensland has an abundance of both, not to mention our solar and wind resources. Our state's natural comparative advantage and highly skilled workforce will see Queensland drive Australia's green exports, just as our state's exports have been central to our nation's current and past prosperity. And that means jobs across our state and in many different companies that are represented here today, even if you're not in the energy sector. Now, the challenge for Queensland, like the entire eastern seaboard, will be approving and connecting generation and storage projects quickly. And after a decade of ideological undermining from the LNP, Queensland and every other state in the national energy market needs new electricity generation, storage and transmission right now. And through our Rewiring the Nation and the Capacity Investment Scheme, among other programs, the Albanese Government is delivering that connection, that generation, that storage and transmission right now. Our government is supporting transformative Queensland investments in this space, like the loans and grants provided to Gladstone's high-purity alumina refinery, Alpha HPA, to Fortescue Future Industries electrolyser facility, also in Gladstone, loans for the Kidston pumped hydro energy storage in North Queensland, and tax incentives for renewable hydrogen projects like that proposed by Stanwell in central Queensland. And I guess one way to think about this is that we all understand that the resources sector has been such a massive contributor to Queensland's prosperity and our nation's prosperity over the last few decades, and continues to be. Jobs in Brisbane, just as much as in central Queensland. And that's what we see happening as developing these new industries. Even if they might be based in central Queensland, that means jobs for that region, but also right across our state. So in summary, Queensland is so well positioned to grab these future jobs, these future industries, and these future energy sources, and the Albanese Government is determined to deliver. Just as we are in all of those other priorities that Queenslanders raise with me when I'm out on the road: cost of living, jobs and wages, housing and Medicare. We're helping Queenslanders through tough times while building a positive future for our state so that we are all better off. That's Labor's plan for Queensland. Now, I have to say, it's a bit of a contrast with the arrogance of the Queensland's federal LNP representatives. With 21 of our state's 30 federal seats and the same lazy approach of over-promising and under-delivering. Taking Queensland for granted, working against Queenslanders when they've needed real help, and now making reckless promises that will actually make things worse. Having battled through some really tough times, Queenslanders and all Australians are now looking ahead. And when they come to vote next year, their key question won't be whether they're better off now than they were before. Australians know that throughout the worldwide inflation surge of the last few years, Labor has had their back. And they know that the cost of living pressure that they have felt would have been a whole lot worse under a coalition who opposed every single piece of Labor's cost of living relief. So at the next election, I think the question that Queenslanders and all Australians will actually be asking is this: in 3 years' time, will I be better off under Anthony Albanese and Labor or under Peter Dutton and the Coalition? And on that question, an arrogant and reckless Peter Dutton comprehensively fails, because it's clear as daylight that he will make things worse. Now, we know this from Peter Dutton's record and from what he's already promised to do if he's elected next year. This is a man who has arrogantly voted against every single piece of cost of living relief Labor has delivered. The tax cuts, the energy bill relief, the cheaper medicines, the cheaper childcare, the fee-free TAFE, the list goes on. Peter Dutton said no to all of it. And now, when Anthony Albanese promises to wipe student debt to help younger Australians if we win the next election, you guessed it, Peter Dutton says no. And when we promise to lock in free TAFE courses for young Australians and those seeking to retrain, he and his team sneer and say it's wasteful spending. But it's not just what Peter Dutton has arrogantly opposed that makes him such a risk to the cost of living of everyday Queenslanders. It's the reckless promises that he's made that will actually drive prices up. Breaking up supermarkets, which the business community agrees will increase grocery prices, not cut them. Nuclear reactors that will supply only 4% of our power needs, but will increase your power bill by $1,000 every year. These kinds of reckless promises won't help Queenslanders struggling with cost of living pressures, they will make them worse. And that's before the pay cuts Peter Dutton has got in store. He supported low wages when he was last in office. He's never supported an increase to the minimum wage. And again, he's opposed every one of our workplace reforms that has delivered higher wages. And before the election campaign has even started, he's now promised to cut labour hire workers' pay by getting rid of same job, same pay, to broaden unfair dismissals, to scrap the rights of casual workers and the right to disconnect, forcing Australians into more unpaid overtime. And he's promised that there will be more repeals to workplace laws announced before the next election. So make no mistake, Peter Dutton and the Coalition are the biggest threat to Queenslanders' wages and workplace conditions since work choices. And that would mean going backwards for so many Queenslanders who've done it so tough over the last few years, whether it's coal miners or cleaners, teachers or tradies, shop assistants or bartenders. With cost of living pressures biting and our economy under strain, it is hard to think of a worse time to cut Queenslanders' pay. But that's exactly what Peter Dutton has in store. It's bad for workers, it's bad for families, and it's bad for the Queensland economy. And that's before we get to the $315 billion in spending cuts that he's promised, including to housing. In the middle of a housing crisis, Peter Dutton has committed to cut $19 billion from our housing plans. $10 billion from our government's Housing Australia Future Fund, $5.5 billion from our Help to Buy scheme, and $3 billion from the New Homes Bonus. And now, having had no policy ideas of his own, he's copying our plan for housing infrastructure. We're already delivering a similar amount to what Peter Dutton has promised in enabling infrastructure to get homes built, and it's rolling out already. But he isn't just cutting housing, he's also blocking our efforts to help more Queenslanders realise their dream of home ownership. And as I've said, he's doing so backed up by an increasingly extreme Greens party who are so obsessed with grandstanding that they'll share a stage with the disgraced CFMEU leaders rather than work with Labor to deliver the homes that young Queenslanders need. And then there's Medicare. At the next election, Queenslanders will have a choice between a Labor government who invests in Medicare and bulk billing and Peter Dutton, who was voted by Australia's doctors as our country's worst ever health minister. The man who cut bulk billing, who cut $50 billion in funding for public hospitals, and who tried to bring in the infamous GP tax. The man who wanted to increase the cost of prescription medicines and who set up the Medicare privatisation task force. Peter Dutton was so bad in health that even Tony Abbott had to sack him, yet he now thinks that he's fit to lead our nation. We know what he'll do in the future if he's given the chance, because we know what he did in the past. Bulk billing won't be safe from Peter Dutton's cuts, and neither will urgent care clinics. Neither will PBS medicines. And for a man who looks to the past, I guess we shouldn't be surprised that he opposes a future made in Australia. That's right, Peter Dutton is on the record opposing a future made in Australia. By promising to cut Labor's investments in renewables and those new industries, he's told us he wants to see our future made in China, in the US, anywhere except places like Gladstone, Townsville and Cairns. So in conclusion, when we do get to next year's federal election, Queenslanders will have a very clear choice. A government who has stood by them during really hard times, driving down inflation while providing crucial cost of living support. Or an opposition who has voted against every piece of that support and now wants to cut more. A government who will keep lifting wages while creating 1 million new jobs, or an opposition who has always delivered wage cuts and now promises to do it again. A government who is building the new homes that Queenslanders need, or an opposition that is teaming up with the Greens to stand in the way. A government that invented Medicare, that has always protected it and is now rebuilding it, or an opposition headed by the man voted Australia's worst ever health minister. A government that supports a future made in Australia, or an opposition who wants to ship that future offshore. So next year, when Queenslanders and all Australians ask themselves who will make them better off in 3 years' time, I'm confident that they'll decide it's Anthony Albanese and Labor. And that is so that we can keep delivering to Queensland and take this great state forward and do it together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. I've got a couple of questions before I throw over to my colleagues in the Parliamentary Press Gallery at the back of the room. There's been, as I mentioned in my introduction, the CFMEU have taken their administration calmly and quietly, and in that vein, there's been a building unions rally in Sydney today, and Darren Greenfield has said a couple of things probably while you've been on stage. So I'm just going to read you out his quotes. That's the deposed State Secretary of the New South Wales CFMEU. He said that he would fight for the CFMEU until the last breath in my effing body. I thought we had rights in this country, but these bastards, that's you, have... have all the power and can get rid of your rights at the drop of a hat, but the battle will go on. We had 12 years of a Liberal government and flourished. Where are the investigations and evidence for the allegations? Now, there are strict rules in the administration about anti-avoidance provisions. From what you've heard about Mr Greenfield's statements and even his just appearance at the rally today, have you got any concerns that he's breached those anti-avoidance provisions and could be up for civil penalties?
Thanks, Sarah. I didn't worry too much about mentioning the CFMEU issues in my speech because I was pretty confident they would come up in the questions. Darren Greenfield, as you said, the deposed State Secretary of the New South Wales branch of the CFMEU Construction Division, is currently facing corruption charges, as is his son, the former Assistant Secretary of the union as well. So I think that's important context as to why he might be a little bit upset at the moment. You're right. For starters, I have seen something about the rally. It's interesting to note that a couple of months ago, there were pretty large rallies, if we're being honest, in a number of different state capitals, including here in Brisbane. There were then a series of smaller rallies in those same capital cities. Today, there is one protest that I'm told was very poorly attended, held in Sydney with no other rallies held anywhere else in the country. And interestingly, I learned that in this rally today in New South Wales, while it was quite poorly attended, would you believe a Greens upper house member from New South Wales jumped up on stage to declare her lifelong support for what they were doing. So some people don't learn. But to turn to your question, you're right. In the legislation that was passed by the Parliament recently, there were provisions included that allow action to be taken against people who are frustrating the administration and are trying to bring it down. Last week in Senate estimates, you may have seen the General Manager of the Fair Work Commission said that he had spoken with construction companies and issued information to people about the risk they would be facing if they did take action that was about undermining and frustrating the administration. So I guess it's probably not appropriate for me to sort of say what will happen. That's a matter for the Fair Work Commission General Manager. But it is clear that the Fair Work Commission will be taking action against those who are trying to get in the way of cleaning up a union that needed to be cleaned up, and to ensure that that union can return to its job, which is representing its members' interests. I've always said throughout this process that this is not about taking out the CFMEU, depriving workers of union representation. Construction, and I know we've got people from construction here, it's a tough, dangerous, hard industry, and those workers deserve strong representation, but they also deserve a clean union, and that's what this administration we intend to deliver.
Okay, thank you. Now, can I throw to Savannah Meacham from AAP over on the media table at the back?
Afternoon, Senator. How concerned is the federal government that the Queensland Government is causing further cost blowouts by delaying the 2032 Olympics venue plan with a 100-day review?
Thanks for the question. I think we've all seen the predictable shock horror from an incoming government talking about budget blowouts. I think it's every day we see a new claim being made. In terms of the Olympics, of course, as a passionate Queenslander, I'm incredibly supportive of us hosting the Olympics. I know the Prime Minister's keen. We've got a Queensland-based minister federally in Annika Wells, who's the Minister for the Olympics. So we're very supportive of that going forward, and that's why we've already put on the table around $3.5 billion of federal funding to assist build the Brisbane Arena, which will be a fantastic legacy for Brisbane, but also some smaller venues in other parts of the state. So I think any fair observer would say that that's a pretty fair contribution from a federal government towards an event being staged largely by a state government. I've seen the LNP's claims about budget blowouts, and I am concerned that having yet another review into something that has been reviewed to death is only just going to result in more delays and more cost blowouts. So that's why we've been saying it's time to get on with it. They've got a 4-year term in office for the moment. Time is running out to lose another 100 days before we actually start seeing building happening. That just puts more pressure on those projects going forward. So we'll always engage with them, but they need to get on with it.
Rose Innes from the Courier Mail's next.
Good afternoon, Senator. What are your thoughts around BPIC, and do you think that we should have it?
That's a CFMEU adjacent question. Look, that's a state government policy. We don't have exactly the same sort of policies at the federal level. The incoming Queensland government has made some clear commitments around what they intend to do there, and that's a matter for them. I just bring this back to principles, which is that we obviously want to see value for taxpayers in terms of the cost of projects being delivered, and we want to see workers get a fair go. That's the kind of arrangements that we're supporting at the federal level, and we'd expect all state governments to do the same.
Is there a reason why you don't have BPICs for federal government infrastructure projects?
Well, typically the role of the federal government in infrastructure projects is funding them or joint funding them with project management done by the states. So we don't tend to get involved at that level of detail about exactly what the pay rates are, exactly what the conditions are, exactly what the timeframes are. That's what the states do, as well as partially fund those projects. So I've not seen any indication that we intend to get involved at that level of detail.
And 26 RDOs a year on top of annual leave acceptable on a state government funded infrastructure project under a BPIC?
Well, those unions negotiated those deals. I'm not going to criticise people for standing up for their rights, but as I say, what we want to see as a federal government is value for money. We're asking all Australian taxpayers to chip in for the cost of all of these projects wherever they are in Australia, and you will have seen that one of the things that we've done as a result of those allegations involving the CFMEU is start having a much closer look at some of the contracts to ensure that there is no opportunities in there for the kind of corruption that seemed to surface, particularly in some of those Victorian projects.
James Hall from the Australian Financial Review.
She turned it off on me. Thank you for your address today. I'm shock horror. I'm going to ask about CFMEU.
Sure.
Just to follow up on Sarah's question on the rally in New South Wales, surely this constitutes behaviour that undermines the administration, and is it time the administrator used his powers under the scheme that you gave to punish this ousted leadership?
So, as I said earlier, it's actually the Fair Work Commission that has the power to take action under the scheme of under the laws that we passed. I do think it's noteworthy that the number of people attending these rallies, the number of states they're happening, is shrinking every time it happens. So I think we need to keep it in perspective. But we absolutely expect that the Fair Work Commission will make use of the laws that were passed by the Parliament. We expect that the Fair Work Ombudsman will make use of their powers when it comes to unprotected industrial action. So the powers are there for people to use, and they need to use them.
You've been talking today about Queensland being the battleground state, and as a proud Queenslander and political reporter, of course, I agree with you. But Queensland Labor has just 5 of Queensland's 30 federal seats. None of those are north of Moreton Bay.
Shane's Electric goes a little bit above Moreton Bay.
Does it, Shane? I beg your pardon. Okay, well, nothing much.
Not very far north.
Nothing north of the Sunshine Coast, thank you. Which isn't very far north in a very big state. Regional Queensland has largely already rejected federal Labor, and at October 26 we saw a near wipeout of state Labor in regional Queensland. What has Labor done wrong, and how does Labor win back those regional voters?
Yeah, look, I mean, obviously Queensland is a pretty challenging state for Labor, particularly at the federal level. I do think that one of the challenges we face, it's a bit like market share, if you like. When the LNP have 21 out of 30 seats and we have 5, mostly concentrated in the southeast corner, it is difficult to get your voice out there when you've got LNP members all the way up the state with a media market to themselves, or with communications entitlements that they can be mailing stuff for their constituents, all the rest of it. So that's why incumbency is an advantage, just as it is for Labor in the southeast corner at the federal level. So that's a sort of a structural problem, if you like. But I guess, again, to come back to what I said in my speech, it's no accident that those sort of 5 key agendas that I went through, cost of living, jobs and wages, housing, Medicare and Future Made in Australia, it's no accident that they are exactly the kind of things that Queenslanders are calling for, including in regional Queensland. It has been really hard to get a GP appointment in regional Queensland. I remember at the last federal election, I was campaigning in the seat of Flynn, based on Gladstone, but went up to Gracemere, just near Rocky. And I'd been told this by the candidate, but it wasn't until I experienced it that I really believed it. We were door knocking 2 or 3 streets, both sides, over the course of an hour and a half, and of the homes that were home, probably every second person complained to me without prompting that they couldn't get a GP appointment. And they live within half an hour's drive of Rocky. They're not like hours away. So it's really hard for people to get GP appointments. That's why we're acting on Medicare. The Future Made in Australia agenda, I made the point that even businesses here today based in Brisbane, I think, will receive benefits from it. The construction firms, the aviation companies, all the rest of it. But so much of this activity is going to be happening in central Queensland. It's probably one of the 5 national hotspots for investment in things like renewable hydrogen. Rio Tinto, I've been to their operations. Boyne Smelters making aluminium. They're moving towards using renewable energy to power their plant. Not because they're greenies, because it's cheaper. And it's how they become competitive with Canada, who uses hydropower. They're investing in low emissions technology to produce alumina. So there is so much of that activity happening, same in Townsville, same in Cairns, same in Mackay. So I think we will be going to the next election with a really good offer to regional Queenslanders. We will have to overcome that market share issue, but we've also got some outstanding candidates running for us in the regions. Matt Smith is our candidate in Leichhardt. I think you've met him. He is basically twice as tall as me. And, I know I'm not the tallest guy going around, but he is enormous because he's a former Cairns Taipan basketball player. Really well known in the community. A really long record of community service. He's going to be an outstanding candidate in an electorate where we've obviously got a retiring LNP member. So don't write us off in the regions, I reckon.
We might go back to Savannah Meacham from AAP.
Just back to the Olympics, I'm sorry. You touched on the federal government contribution to the 2032 venues before. How likely is it that the federal government will contribute more money to the venue plan when state and federal governments review their agreement in February, after Queensland's Deputy Premier said that there should be more room for change in the existing funding agreement?
Well, again, shock horror, Deputy Premier of Queensland Government wants federal government to pay for things. And shock horror, incoming government says projects have had budget blowouts. As I say, we will always constructively engage with the Queensland Government about these things, but there is an agreement in place that is seeing federal investment of $3.5 billion. And it was well understood, and I think it was part of the agreement, that for the Brisbane Arena project, that any cost increases would be borne by the state government, not the federal government. If any of you entered into an agreement like that, you probably wouldn't be keen to renegotiate it. When it's there in black and white. I mean, I guess the other thing I'm just concerned about with these constant claims about budget blowouts is that it feels to me that the LNP are softening Queenslanders up for budget cuts to health, to schools, to roads, like we've always seen them do. So, they've got elected, they've got a job to do, and I think they should get on with it.
So no wiggle room on the $3.5 billion from the feds?
No, not from our point of view. I mean, as I say, we've got an agreement in place. It explicitly said that the cost was capped and that the state would be responsible for any increases, and that's now their responsibility.
Rose Innes from the Courier Mail.
The cost of Olympic Games venues has increased, so shouldn't the Commonwealth increase its contribution if Queensland taxpayers have to?
Well, the Queensland Government is responsible for managing those projects. They've got a range of options to do that. But as I say, I don't remember the then opposition saying that we shouldn't host the Olympics in Queensland and that we shouldn't be building venues. They obviously got through the election campaign saying they'd have a review and not wanting to talk about what was going to happen with venues. But as I say, we are really supportive of Brisbane and Queensland hosting these Olympics. We backed it in with significant funds, just as we backed in things like the Bruce Highway and other things as well. But it is now up to the Queensland Government to manage that.
James Hall from the Fin.
Just one on small business, Senator. Labor promised Senator Pocock earlier this year would review the suitability of the current 15-employee threshold for small business exemptions from IR laws. Small business figures say that they've been left out, and after that's been delayed till after that review has been delayed till after the election. What's your government doing for small business in relation to IR laws?
Thanks, James. Well, when we passed the various different workplace law changes, we actually did provide for exemptions for small business for a range of those changes, and we delayed their introduction for small businesses in recognition that they would need more time to adjust. So things like the right to disconnect don't commence for small businesses until the second half of next year, 12 months after they started for bigger businesses. Some of the changes we made around casual employment don't start for small businesses for a period of time. So there was recognition that small businesses needed a bit more time to adjust. Of course, we are providing a whole range of support for small businesses that I didn't go through in the speech, but just as we're providing energy bill relief for householders, we're doing so for small businesses. Instant asset write-offs being extended. So there has been a range of different support provided for small businesses. The point about the definition of small business is connected to unfair dismissal laws. What I've said is that we will honour the commitment to review the definition of small business as it relates to workplace laws, but we're not going to be making it easier for businesses to sack people. And again, to get back to where I was in the speech, you know, right now, when people are doing it really tough, I don't think it's a good move for Queenslanders or businesses and our general economy to make it easier to sack people. We need people in work, not being risked with unfair dismissal simply because of the size of the business they work for.
That brings us back to the CFMEU. As you mentioned before, the sort of the epicentre of the allegations of criminality against the CFMEU are in New South Wales and Victoria, yet the Queensland CFMEU was also put into administration. Are you aware of any allegations of criminality against the CFMEU in Queensland?
Like I think anyone who's been around the construction sector, there have always been rumours. There are, to my knowledge, no one connected to the CFMEU in Queensland has been charged with an offence. You will have seen this week, I think it was in your newspaper, that the administrator has commissioned a forensic report to look into financial transactions involving the CFMEU in Queensland. You know, we'll obviously see what that provides. I can only assume that he has a reason for commissioning that investigation, and we will see whether we do have CFMEU figures from Queensland facing charges in the way that they are now in New South Wales and Victoria.
And there's a question from the floor. I've got a couple more minutes, and you've only got a couple minutes to answer this. It might be a quick answer. The Albanese Government abolished the ABCC and the Registered Organisations Commission. Is there any temptation, would there be any temptation or any scenario where those two bodies are re-enlivened, particularly given what we've seen happening in the construction industry recently?
No. That's my short answer. The longer answer is we abolished the ABCC when we were elected. We have no intention of bringing it back. I know that it is held up by some people as this great organisation that did great things. If you have a look at what it achieved, too often it spent its time pursuing trivial matters like flags on work sites, stickers on people's helmets, literally through the courts using taxpayers' funds to do so. Whether women should have particular toilets on construction sites, being the argument was that they shouldn't, when clearly they should. But also, productivity fell in construction while the ABCC was in operation. All of these allegations that have come to light recently in the media happened while the ABCC was there. They're not things that happened last week or last month. So I understand that some people see it as the solution. We think it failed on those grounds, but also when we abolished the ABCC, a range of its powers and resources were transferred to the Fair Work Ombudsman and the Fair Work Commission. So right now, the Fair Work Ombudsman has, I think it's 42 investigations underway into behaviour in the construction sector, many of which involve CFMEU officials. The Fair Work Commission has similar investigations underway. So there are other bodies that are doing similar work to the ABCC without the partisanship that we saw from the ABCC.
And how's the knee, by the way, after that soccer incident?
I'm not going to play for Barcelona anytime soon.
I'm sure that's the reason.
And daughter's chagrin. These days I don't get to play quite as many games, unfortunately, as you can probably tell.
Thank you, everybody, for your attendance today. And please thank Senator Watt for his address and his candour in answering our questions.
Thanks.
And we have to acknowledge our naming rights partners, Virgin Australia Group, the Brisbane Airport Corporation and Griffith University. Thank you very much. For more information on the Queensland Media Club's upcoming events, please sign up to our mailing list and just scan that little QR thing on the back of your menus and you can find all about what's coming up next year. Thank you for coming to today's event. We'll see you next year.